I always say that the road has a strange way of throwing surprises in its path, but that night it went too far. I parked my truck at the Route 40 diner around 9. The flashing neon sign cast shadows on the cracked asphalt, and the place was more empty than usual. That didn't bother me, even prefer it. Less people, more quiet. After so long driving, my muscles were crying for a break. So I got out of the cabin, stretched my arms, and felt the fresh night air. Love this life. I always like to be on the road, going from one place to another without ties. I went into the diner and ordered a double burger with potatoes and a strong black coffee. The smell of fat and old coffee was almost comforting. Sat on the counter and began to flip through an old newspaper that someone left there. It was when I noticed the guy standing next to me. He didn't look like the kind of person you see at trucker stops. In black suits, shoeshine shoes, and a smile that seemed calculated. He looked straight at me, as if he already knew who I was. Luke Harper, right? Frown. I do not like strangers who know my name. Who wants to know? Someone with a proposal. Something that may interest you. Look, friend, if you're trying to sell something, I'm not in the mood. He laughed, but it was not a friendly laugh. I'm not selling, Mr. Harper. Now he had my attention. The guy pulled a card out of his pocket and put it on the counter, right in front of me. Nothing was written, only a phone number. I have a shipment that needs to be delivered in Denver. It's something delicate, but not illegal, I assure you. And why me? I asked, crossing my arms. Your reputation. You are discreet, reliable, and know how to handle tight deadlines. I could not avoid a smile. I like to be recognized even for something like that. Yeah. And what do I need to do? Just follow the instructions. Do not open the compartment, do not deviate from the route, and do not comment on the delivery to anyone. It seems too simple. It's simple. He smiled. And very rewarding. That's when he pulled an envelope from the pocket of his suit and put it on the counter. When I opened, I almost dropped the coffee. $5,000? Half now, half when you complete the delivery. I laughed, shaking my head. Right? And if I refuse? He shrugged, as if it was not a big deal. Then I find another. But something tells me you won't refuse. He was right. I'm not the type that lets easy money pass, especially with the gasoline in the heights and the bills piling up. And when do I start? Right now. I finished my coffee, put the envelope in my jacket pocket, and followed the man to the parking lot. He took me to a shiny black truck, standing next to mine. It was an impressive machine, almost brand new. He handed me the keys and gave a satisfied smile. Everything is ready. Good trip, Mr. Harper. And before I could say anything, he turned his back and disappeared into the night. I stared at the truck for a few seconds, feeling a strange chill in my spine. Something in the silence that night seemed wrong. But as always, I ignored the feeling. I went up into the cabin, turned the key, and the engine roared. Whatever it was would be left behind as soon as I took the road. Or at least that's what I thought. The road at night always had a charm for me. The silence, the lights of the headlights cutting off the darkness, the feeling of being completely alone in the world. But on that trip, the silence seemed different, heavy, as if something was hidden in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to appear. The truck was rolling smoothly, as expected from such a new machine. The cabin was spacious and modern, quite different from my old road partner. But as comfortable as it was, I couldn't relax. The pay was too good, the guy who hired me too mysterious, and the cargo, I didn't know what I was taking. I just knew it was something important enough for someone to pay $10,000 for absolute secrecy. The first hours were quiet. I took the road towards Denver, listening to my usual playlist, classic rock with some country music for a change. But as the dawn advanced, I began to notice strange things. First were the noises. At first, I thought it was something in my head. Small pops, like with squeaking, coming from the cargo compartment. But then I heard something more distinct. A muffled sound, as if something was scraping the container wall. I slowed down and looked in the rearview mirror. Everything seemed normal. I tried to convince myself that it was just the load adjusting to the truck's movement. That happens sometimes, right? But the noise continued intermittent, almost as if it were deliberate. Took the radio and tuned in to the trucker's frequency. Anyone on? This is Luke, on Route 40. The silence lasted a few seconds before a low voice answered. Talk, Luke. This is Travis. Are you okay? For now, yes. I'm just feeling that this road is weird today. It's the nighttime. Always makes us think too much. Laughs trying to ease the tension. Yeah, maybe that's it. Thanks, Travis. Turned off the radio and got back to focus on the road. But the bad feeling didn't leave me. It was as if the truck was heavier than it should be. As if the road itself resisted every mile I went. It was then that I saw the truck. She was behind me with high headlights, keeping a constant distance. It was not unusual for someone to hitch a ride on the trail of a truck to save fuel, but there was something about the way the truck kept standing behind me that bothered me. I sped up a bit, but she followed. I slowed down and she did the same. Got the radio again. Travis, are you still around? Nothing. Only static. It was then that the truck turned off the headlights and disappeared. For a moment, I stared in the mirror, hoping she would reappear. It didn't happen. A shiver came up through my spine, and my instinct told me that something was very wrong. I stopped at the side of the road and went down to stretch my legs, telling myself that it was just paranoia. But when I got to the back of the truck, what I saw left me speechless. There were hand marks. They were not simple dirt or dust marks. They were clear prints, blood-stained hands, strewn around the door of the cargo compartment. I felt my stomach turn. I looked around, trying to find any sign that someone was there. Nothing but the sound of wind and the distant hum of a transmission line. Went back up in the cabin with my heart pounding, closed the door and locked all the locks. Just deliver the damn cargo, Luke, murmured to myself. I turned the key and the engine roared. The road again unfolded before me, but now every mile seemed like a nerve test. I still did not know what I was carrying, but I was sure of one thing. I was not alone on that trip. Not sure when it started, but I knew something was wrong. You know that feeling of being watched? As if someone was hiding in the darkness, just waiting for the right moment? That's what I felt. The road was deserted. Just me, my truck, and miles of asphalt that seemed to extend forever. At every turn, I looked in the rearview mirror, hoping to see that damn truck again, but there was no sign of it. I tried to concentrate on the direction. I turned on the radio, looked for some music or even a conversation that would distract me. But for some reason, all frequencies were covered by static. Great. Exactly what I needed, I murmured, turning off the device. That's when I heard one voice, not by the radio, not by the road, came from inside the cabin. Do you know what you're carrying, Luke? My fingers almost let go of the wheel. The sound was low, like a whisper, but clear enough to creep me out. I looked at the passenger seat. It was empty, but I could have sworn someone was there. Who is there? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing. Only the motors roaring and the sound of tires on the road. Accelerated. Whatever it was, I didn't want to stand around to find out. My heart was racing. My hands were sweating on the wheel, and the feeling that something or someone was with me just increased. The noises in the cargo hold came back. They weren't just creaks now. They were beats, rhythmic, almost like something was trying to get out. Shit, 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 I murmured, speeding even more. My mind was trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was the bumpy road. Maybe it was the cargo that was not tied up well. But then the voice came back. You shouldn't have taken that job, Luke. This time, I almost threw the truck off the track. I stepped on the brakes, stopping at the curb with so much force that the engine nearly choked. Who is there? Come on, I cried, looking around like a madman. Just silence. But then, slowly, the radio turned on by itself. The static came back, but this time it turned into something different. A laugh, weak, distorted, but unmistakable. My heart seemed to be about to explode. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. It's just your head. You're tired. That's all. I turned the truck on again and headed back to the road. But as I was driving, something caught my eye through the rearview mirror. The cargo compartment door. She was half open. Don't know how that was possible. I had locked that thing in a lock before I left. But there it was, swaying slightly with the wind. No, no, no. I stopped the truck again, already not knowing if it was acting by impulse or pure insanity. I went down, holding a flashlight, and went to the rear of the vehicle. The door was really open. Not completely, but enough for me to see the darkness inside. The light of the flashlight trembled in my hand as I pointed to the inside of the compartment. Who is there? The light revealed boxes, all closed, exactly as they should be. But for a second, I thought I saw something moving in the far corner. Something small, too fast to identify. Get out of here, I cried, the voice breaking at the end. Silence answered me, closed the door so hard that the sound echoed through the empty road. I locked the lock again and climbed back up in the cabin, feeling my legs tremble. As I walked away, one thing was clear. I wasn't dealing with just noises or voices anymore. Whatever it was with me, and I was sure that he knew what he was carrying. I didn't know how long it had been. The dawn seemed to drag on, and every kilometer traveled was an effort to keep my sanity intact. The feeling that something was wrong, that something in the truck should not be there, only increased. My mind worked frantically, seeking explanations. Maybe it was a trick of the guy who hired me, a test to see if I was reliable. Maybe he was getting paranoid, too tired after so many hours on the road. But every time I tried to convince myself, I heard something, a sound, presence, and then the lights started to go out. First, the headlights, a quick blink, as if they were about to burn. Then the panel started to light and go off, the pointer swaying like crazy. It was as if the whole truck was rebelling against me. Damn, not now, I murmured, trying to keep control. Pulled into the curb once more, turning off the engine to try to understand what was happening. From outside, the wind seemed to howl, almost like a whisper. The silence of the road was overwhelming, but even so I felt that I was not alone. I went to the front of the truck, opened the hood and started checking what I could. He wasn't exactly a mechanic, but he had already learned some things on the road. But as I was moving the cables, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. A laugh came from behind the truck. I dropped everything and went over there, holding the flashlight tight. The cargo compartment door was closed. The lock was still there, but the laughter continued, low and distorted, as if it came from within. Who is there? I cried, trying to sound angry, but my voice came out weak. The laughter stopped. Then I heard the sound of footsteps, but they were not on the ground. They were on top of the truck. I raised the lantern, but the light was shaking so hard that I could barely focus. There was nothing there, only the starry sky and the dark outline of the vehicle. Went back up in the cabin, feeling my heart pounding on my chest. I locked the doors, turned on the engine and got back on the road. This time, I don't care about the speed limit. Enough, Luke. Drop the load and go. I would repeat that to myself as a mantra, trying to ignore the growing feeling that I was being followed. But actually, what scared me the most was not the idea of something chasing me. It was what I was carrying. Took the radio again, hoping to hear some familiar voice. Anyone on the line? This is Luke. I need help. The radio shrieked, static filling the void. For a moment I thought I was alone, until a voice answered. Luke, you shouldn't have taken this job. It was the same voice as before. The same voice I heard in the cabin. Who are you? What do you want? It doesn't matter who I am. It matters what you are taking. The radio went silent again, leaving only static. My whole body was shaking. I needed to know. He could no longer drive without understanding what was happening. When I finally found a gas station by the side of the road, I stopped without thinking twice. It was a small, deserted place with a faint light blinking over the entrance of the convenience store. I stepped out of the truck, ignoring the old man on the counter who was watching me with tired eyes. I walked to the rear of the vehicle with the flashlight in my hands. Let's get it over with, I murmured, taking a deep breath. With trembling hands, I unlocked the lock and opened the door of the cargo compartment. The air inside was heavy, as if it were difficult to breathe. The light of the lantern swept through the space, revealing the stacked boxes. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but as I approached, I felt something. Presence. That's when I saw. In the darkest corner, something moved. Too fast for me to identify, but enough to make me back up. What is that? The laughter returned, now higher, echoing in the closed space. Closed the door with force and ran back to the cabin, locking everything. The old man in the post kept watching me, but did not say a word. Never again accept a load without knowing what it is. I promised myself, turning on the engine and leaving there as fast as I could. But deep down, I knew it was too late to turn back. Back to the road with my mind boiling. No matter how hard I tried, could not erase the image of that movement in the dark corner of the load. Was that real, or was I losing my mind? Accelerated as if he could escape the suffocating feeling that the truck carried. The dawn seemed darker, the road narrower, as if the world around me was shrinking. Outside, the wind was rising. The trees danced frantically in the light of the headlights, projecting distorted shadows that seemed to accompany the truck. The feeling of being watched was now constant, and I didn't know if it was something in my head or something real. It was then that I heard again. Luke, you can't run away. The voice came again from the radio, but this time it was clearer, closer. What do you want from me? I cried, punching the steering wheel. The radio squeaked, but no response came. I looked in the rearview mirror, and it was when I realized something that made me freeze. There was a figure on the road, a few meters behind the truck. It wasn't a pickup or a car, but it looked like a human figure. He ran with an impossible speed, always at the same distance. Sped up, my heart beating like crazy. He looked at the speedometer going up, but every time he looked in the rearview mirror, the figure was still there, as if it were stuck to the truck. It can't be real, I whispered to myself, my eyes alternating between the road and the mirror. Suddenly, the figure disappeared. The silence was worse than any sound. The absence of that presence, for some reason, seemed even more threatening. You'll understand soon. The voice came back, now whispering in my ear as if it were inside the cabin. I turned my head to the passenger seat and saw something that made me scream. A silhouette, dark, humanoid, sitting there motionless. Who are you? What do you want? I asked, trying not to lose control of the truck. The figure did not respond. It just slowly turned its head towards me, and that's when I realized. She had no face. I looked away for a second, trying to keep the truck on the road, and when I looked again, the figure was gone. My breath was heavy, my body covered in cold sweat. It was as if something was playing with me, testing the limit of my sanity. I just need to deliver this cargo. That's all. I repeated these words as a prayer, trying to ignore the terror that was infiltrating every corner of my mind. But the road ahead of me seemed to change. The signs that once pointed in directions were now blank. The trees seemed closer, as if they were invading the asphalt, and the asphalt itself seemed to dissolve, turning into something dark, viscous, which made the truck swing. It was then that the engine began to choke. No, not now, I cried, trying to keep the truck moving. The vehicle lost speed until it stopped completely. The engine died, and the lights went out, plunging me into total darkness. There I stood in the oppressive silence, with only my breath and the sound of the wind outside. I took the lantern, trembling, and lit up the cabin. Nothing. Opened the door and went down, trying to understand what had happened. When I looked back, I saw that the cargo compartment door was wide open. My body froze. I locked. I whispered, the fear growing like a wave overwhelming. Slowly walked to the back of the truck, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The light revealed the boxes, some turned over, others broken. But in the middle of them, there was something that should not be there. A figure, bent, immobile as if it was waiting for me. When I pointed the lantern directly, it rose slowly, revealing a pale face, without expression, with deep eyes that seemed to look straight at my soul. You should not have accepted this load. Before I could react, the lantern went out, and everything was in complete darkness. The fear was almost palpable. The darkness was so dense that I could hardly see my own feet on the ground. Everything was too quiet. Even the wind had ceased, as if the world had stopped breathing. I knew the figure was there, right in front of me, waiting for me to look at it. But for some reason, what terrified me most was not her vision, but the fact that I did not want to look. The simple act of facing that was like opening a door to something that should not be revealed. I took a deep breath and, with an instinctive movement, I took a step back, bumping into the wall of the truck. When the lantern finally lit again, the figure was gone. I took off my hat and ran my hands over my face, feeling the cold sweat running down my neck. My body was paralyzed, and my mind was spinning, trying to process what had just happened. I was beginning to doubt myself. Every sound, every shadow seemed like a provocation, a way of making me lose control. The words of the voice on the radio echoed in my mind. You should not have accepted this burden. And I started to wonder, what if I hadn't accepted? What would happen to me now? I went to the dashboard and tried to start the engine again. The truck snored weak but did not catch. I turned the key several times, but nothing happened. It was when the dim light of the flashlight revealed a detail that made me choke. There was something on the glass of the cabin, something written with a dark and viscous paint. What scared me the most was that I recognized that writing. Luke, you can't run away. The feeling that something was closing around me was overwhelming. The cargo I was carrying, that thing I knew nothing about, seemed now closer than ever. As if it had life, as if it was approaching me. There is no way out, I thought. Not aloud, but the idea was hammering through my mind, repeating itself incessantly. My gaze went to the rearview mirror, and for a second, I almost saw the figure again. That figure running, always at the same distance, always close but never reaching. That's when everything started to make sense. I wasn't just carrying a load. I was carrying something that shouldn't be there. Something that was following me, manipulating me. And then, in a rush, I looked into the cargo hold, even though I knew I shouldn't. But curiosity overcame fear. I needed to know. Could not continue without understanding what was happening. Opened the truck door again. The light of the lantern revealed the broken and fallen boxes. But this time there was something new, something I had not seen before. A dark, sticky liquid covered the floor, and as I focused the flashlight on one of the boxes, I saw that it was open. Inside it, an object was visible, an object covered with torn and tattered cloths. My fingers trembled when I touched the cloth. Whatever was there was big, heavy. I pulled him, feeling a growing pressure on his chest until he finally revealed what was underneath. It was a mask, a pale mask, without expression, with empty eyes and a distorted smile, as if it had been created to deceive, to distort reality. I held her in my hands, the feeling of terror increasing every second. When I looked at her, I realized something that made me take a step back. The mask was not empty. There was something behind her, looking directly at me. Something with deep eyes, staring at me with unbearable intensity. I wanted to let go of the mask, but somehow it was stuck in my hands. It was as if she didn't want me to let go. I threw the mask away, feeling my body go into shock. My mind couldn't process what was happening. Before I could do anything else, the truck started moving. Slowly but with uncontrollable force. The cargo was taking me somewhere. I had no more control over the truck. Closed my eyes, trying to concentrate. The voice, that damn voice, came back on the radio. You should never have accepted. I looked at the horizon, hoping to see something that would make me believe I was still in control. But instead, the road ahead of me seemed to be distorted. The track lines disappeared, and the road became a dark spiral, swallowing everything that was there. The feeling of being pulled into an endless abyss was uncontrollable. I no longer knew what was real. I no longer knew who was in charge. The only certainty I had now was that I had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. The road kept twisting before me, an endless line of asphalt that seemed to have no end. The truck was now on autopilot, as if it had life of its own. With each turn I took, the feeling of uncontrolled increased, and the lights in the cabin blinked, as if they were trying to warn me about something I did not want to understand. The shadows stretched out more than they should, bending at impossible angles, as if the world around me was beginning to bend. I tried to think rationally. I tried to grab any fragment of logic, but the truth was becoming inescapable. Something was controlling me. The voice on the radio came back, stronger, clearer than ever. You shouldn't have taken this load, Luke. I punched the dashboard, trying to turn off the radio, but the voice wouldn't stop. You already know what it is. You already know who we are. No. I took a deep breath, my throat dry. I looked in the rearview mirrors, hoping to see something, anything, that would give me a clue of where I was. But all I saw was darkness. And then, without warning, the truck stopped abruptly, as if it had hit something invisible. The impact was strong, but I felt no pain. Just a body shaking, as if being shaken from the inside out. The engine was low, completely out. Silence was deafening. I looked around, trying to understand what had happened. The cabin was cold, colder than any place should be. And then I realized I was no longer on the road. The landscape had disappeared. Instead, a thick mist covered everything, swallowing up the world around me. The road had disappeared, and all that was left was a dense, icy fog, as if I were in an endless nightmare. The truck door opened by itself. I stood up, the instinct to run taking care of me. But before I took any step, something stopped me. The figure was there, standing in front of me. It was as if he had emerged from nowhere, a dark figure, tall, with the outline of a human body, but without face. It was the same face that had been chasing me from the beginning. The figure was standing still, but there was a sense of movement around it, as if it were moving even without moving. I knew there was no escape. The figure moved towards me, and it was then that for the first time I realized something even more terrifying. The air around me was not just cold. It was heavy, as if time was being dilated. I could no longer distinguish what was real from what was imaginary. Every step I took, the mist grew thicker, the shape closer. The light of the lantern trembled in my hands, as if it wanted to go out, but I could not look at anything else. The figure was now so close that the cold emanating from it seemed to penetrate my bones. And then the voice came again, not from the radio, but from the figure before me, deep and without emotion. You don't understand, Luke. You never did. What you carry is not a burden. It's a sentence. I was paralyzed. Fear took over every cell of my body. What you carry now will take you where no one can follow you. You cannot go back. There is no way back, Luke. The road is over. The figure raised one of his hands, and the mist around it began to move as if being pulled by it. In a quick move, he raised the mask, that mask I had seen on the load. I tried to get away, but I couldn't. My legs were heavy, as if the earth itself was holding me. And that's when he put on the mask. I saw everything. It wasn't a mask. It was a face. The face of someone I knew. And that face was mine. I yelled. I tried to run, but my legs didn't respond. I looked at my hands, and they were covered by the same dark liquid that I had seen in the truck. The mask fell to the ground, and what remained was a distorted image of myself, deformed, as if being pulled back into darkness. The figure spoke, and his voice was now an echo of what I feared. You can't run from who you are, Luke. You're the burden. Everything fell apart in a second. I was back on the road. The truck was moving again, but the road wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't a road. It was a tunnel, a spiral that dragged me inside. The illuminated panel revealed something that made me faint with horror. The cargo was empty, but in the cabin I saw the reflection of my own face in the rearview mirror, and I knew the road was endless. I would never come back. I don't know how long I stayed there, sitting in the truck cab, staring at the rearview mirror. The feeling of disaccomplishment was so intense that the lines between the real world and the nightmare began to blend. I tried to convince myself that I was still awake, that I still had control, but everything around me screamed the opposite. The road was now a tunnel, but it wasn't an ordinary tunnel. It stretched forever, a dark vortex that seemed to swallow not only the road, but the whole universe around me. I felt the truck moving, but the sound of the engine was muffled, as if everything was being consumed by this dense and suffocating mist that surrounded me. The feeling of speed disappeared, and the truck was simply floating in this empty space. The rearview mirror reflected my image, but it was no longer me. The face I saw was distorted, as if it had been carved by invisible hands, deformed, with the traces of my face mixing with something I could not recognize. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight, as if something was suffocating me inside. "You can't go back, Luke," the voice of the vulture echoed in my mind, and the words made no sense, but at the same time they made all sense. I could not go back. There was no place else for me to go. "You are the burden, Luke. You have always been the burden. There is no way to escape it." I looked at the radio, desperate, wanting to turn it off, but my hands did not respond. The steering wheel, which before seemed familiar, now was strange, as if it were an object I had never touched. I tried to accelerate, but the pedal was no longer there. The truck wasn't responding to what I was doing. Then the voice spoke again, clearer and definitive. "What you carry is no longer something physical. It's no longer a load that you carry. You are." I couldn't understand. I didn't want to understand. And yet, the understanding began to infiltrate my mind, as if the words were being forced into me. The road around the truck began to warp, the edges of the mist expanding and contracting, as if the space itself was being folded. I could feel something was coming, something that shouldn't be there, but it was. It was as if the road was an open wound, and something was moving through it, a presence that dragged and expanded as I went. Suddenly, the images began to overlap. I saw flashes from the beginning of the trip, but in a distorted way. The restaurant by the roadside, the smell of coffee and hot oil, the faces of people I had met along the way. I saw my own image in the mirror, but now she was smiling at me, and the smile wasn't mine. It was the smile of the figure, that faceless being who pursued me. You don't know what it carries. You never knew. And then, without further warning, the view of the road was replaced by another. I was in a cemetery, standing between mossy tombs and stone. The gravestones were in disorder, and the air was heavy, with the smell of wet earth and decomposition. In the center of the cemetery, a figure stood out, hooded with his back to me. I knew who he was, before even seeing his face. It was the man I had seen in the cabin for the first time, the radio man who now stood before me with the mask in his hands. "The load, Luke. The load has always been here." The face turned slowly, and when his eyes met mine, it was as if time stood still. The eyes were dark, but of such deep darkness that it seemed like the whole universe was there, waiting to swallow me. I wanted to talk, shout, run, but could not. My feet were stuck on the ground as if the earth had taken possession of me. The figure smiled, but it was not a smile of triumph. It was a smile of understanding. "You knew, Luke. You knew all along. It's not about what you carry. Never was. It's about what you are." The mask was placed over the face of the figure, and I saw for the last time the distorted reflection of myself, now completely transformed into something that I could no longer recognize. And at that moment, the truth consumed me. I was no longer a man. I was the cargo, the truck, the road. All that was my destination, my end. The light that once shone in my soul was now out, and the mist swallowed me up one last time, certain there was no escape. I woke up with a shock. Didn't know where it was, but the smell of the cab, the sound of the engine, and even the feeling of hands on the steering wheel were there, real, palpable. The fog was no longer around me. The truck was standing still, in the middle of the deserted road. I had erased for a while, or maybe I was dragged to a place that I didn't understand. I didn't know, but my body was tense, muscles sore, as if I had been forced to carry the weight of the world for an eternity. The digital clock on the panel marked any time, which did not help at all. I tried to force myself to breathe in a controlled way, but each exhalation was a struggle, as if something was squeezing my chest. I needed to understand what was happening, what I was really carrying, or maybe what I was. The cab light was off, but the moonlight still illuminated the road ahead of me, revealing a landscape that seemed unreal. The surrounding trees were twisted, with branches that seemed to writhe out of the way, as if they wanted to distract me or trap me. The world was dark, but at the same time, everything seemed too strange to be real. That's when I looked in the mirror again. The reflection was not mine. No more. It was the figure. He was there, behind me on the road, standing in the mist that was beginning to form again. He didn't move, but his gaze was fixed on me, piercing, as if he were waiting for something, hoping I would follow him, perhaps, or maybe waiting for me to turn myself in. I knew I could not keep running. The feeling of loss of control had taken over me so much that I no longer felt I had any choice. But there was a voice, an echo in my mind, a last hope, a spark of lucidity in the midst of the madness that enveloped me. "You know what to do, Luke." I started the truck. The machine was roaring and the road in front of me seemed to open up, but something was wrong. The truck was acting strangely, as if it had a will of its own. I was no longer in control. It was as if the wheels were following an invisible path, traced by something beyond my comprehension. When the road stretched out in front of me, the figure began to walk towards the truck, slowly, without haste, but with an unmistakable purpose. He was no longer in the mirror's reflection. Now he was there on the road, physically present, his inhuman and spectral figure approaching. I tried to speed up, desperate, but something was stopping me. The truck, with all its strength, was stuck, as if the wheels were jammed in something invisible. I screamed, hit my hands on the wheel, feeling the frustration consume me. Nothing seemed to work. The figure was almost by my side, his eyes watching me with a frightening calm. That's when he spoke, and the voice I heard didn't sound human. It was more like a whisper, but so clear, so penetrating, that cut the silence like a knife. "You carry the weight of what you can't understand, Luke. You always knew." What did he mean? What had I always known? The cargo. It was not possible. It wasn't about what I carried. It was about me. I was the cargo. I was always the load. Realization hit me like an electric shock. My heart sped up, and my body shook in a way I didn't know was possible. Those words, those revelations, everything made sense now. I was the weight that carried. I was stuck in an endless journey, a cycle of no exit. "You'll never get out of here, Luke." The face smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of understanding. He knew. He knew there was no return for me. I was trapped, and he, this dark being, was the key that kept this prison closed. I was no longer in control. The truck was moving on its own, advancing faster and faster, going deeper and deeper in the road that did not finish. I didn't know where I was going, but something inside me said it didn't matter. The end had already come. The road, the night, the face. Everything was becoming a blur of hopelessness. I looked forward, trying to find a way out, but the only reflection I saw was my own face distorted in the rearview mirror, now completely unrecognizable. I was the load. There was no way to escape. The truck accelerated, and the lights in front of it were extinguished, leaving only total darkness. Where everything is lost, everything disappears, until time itself is destroyed. The road is empty now. The truck, with its lonely cabin, goes aimlessly, without any sign of life around it. The darkness is deep and infinite, as if the world had disappeared, leaving only the void. Don't know how long I've been running. Time seems to have become an illusion, something that doesn't matter anymore. The truck engine still resonates, a constant, mechanical sound like the heart beating in an empty chest. The steering wheel is in my hands, but I know that it's not me who controls it. The truck, or rather the journey, is who guides me now. I am the only passenger on this endless road. I look in the rearview mirror and see the reflection. It's not my face no more. It is a distorted mask, a fusion of fear and regret, with empty eyes and an expression that I no longer recognize. I wonder if it's still me, if I'm still Luke, or if along the way I've become something completely different. Something that has no name, something that cannot go back. Gradually, the landscapes begin to distort. The trees twist into grotesque forms, and the horizon is disintegrated, as if the world were crumbling. I know what's going on, but I can't care anymore. I'm stuck in a cycle without beginning, without end. Every curve I take is a repetition. Each kilometer traveled takes me back to the point of origin. The cargo I carry was never metal or merchandise. I carried my own soul, and it now has nowhere else to go. I look out the window and there he is, the face. He looks at me with that calm smile, but now he says nothing. He doesn't need it anymore. I know what he wants from me. He wants me to understand, that I accept, that I surrender, and so I follow. The truck accelerates once again, and the road ahead of me continues endlessly, the fog covering everything in front of me. There is no more hurry. There is no more fear. There is only the way, the last charge. I am the last passenger of this journey, and this road, it never ends.